The grand strategic offensive launched by the Russian Federation, intended to be the decisive military operation of 2025, has definitively failed. We are now confronting the stark reality of the October battlefield data, which reveals not a breakthrough, but a state of absolute strategic stagnation. The overwhelming conclusion of this analysis is that the massive expenditure of human life and military resources has been traded for utterly meaningless tactical gains. The war is stuck, and the illusion of Russian military momentum has completely dissolved. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. Also, please watch this video to the very end, even if you play it in the background without sound, as your continuous viewing is critical to help promote the truth about the war. The quantitative evidence for this failure is devastating. Despite constant pressure and continuous assaults across the 1,000-kilometer front, the Russian army has been unable to sustain its momentum. Week after week, the statistics compiled by independent military observers confirm a pattern of abysmal and strategically bankrupt progress. The average advance across the entire front line now measures just 280 meters per month. This is not a military advance. It is glacial, agonizing movement that is virtually indistinguishable from a static line. To put this into human terms, the Russian army is, on average, moving across the front at the speed of a human walking a brisk pace for only a single hour. This is the definition of a positional deadlock. This microscopic rate of advance is coupled with an incomprehensible human cost. The strategic failure of the offensive is being paid for by the lives of Russian soldiers at a shocking, unsustainable rate. When factoring in the official casualty counts and dividing them across the minuscule territorial gains, the calculus is horrific. Russia is sacrificing approximately 35 killed soldiers for every single square kilometer of territory occupied. This translates to one human life for every few centimeters of progress when distributed across the entire front. With current losses estimated at over 10,000 killed per month, the total human cost required just to capture the remaining territory in the Donbass alone is estimated to be over 300,000 Russian lives. This vast expenditure of manpower for negligible gain is the clearest possible sign that the strategy of attrition has failed and is now merely a self-consuming process. The strategic consequences of this stagnation are critical. The core political lies that the Russian army is strengthening its position and encircling major cities are contradicted by the reality on the ground. The Russian command is so devoid of actual success that the leader himself is forced to announce fabricated victories, such as the non-existent encirclement of 10,000 Ukrainian troops. This public delusion only masks a critical military truth. The war is stuck, and the political goals of capturing cities like Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka are no closer to being achieved. And the Russian army is trapped in a war it is structurally incapable of winning. The military resources that should have been hoarded for a final decisive maneuver are being wasted in suicidal actions that yield nothing but a slow, bloody grind. The military failure of the Russian army is compounded by a corrosive system of institutionalized deception. The second critical symptom of this collapse is the continuous, brazen fabrication of battlefield victories by the Russian General Staff, designed to mask the overwhelming reality of the tactical deadlock. This public lie, intended to secure a political narrative of success for Vladimir Putin, proves that the army is structurally incapable of achieving a real breakthrough. The most recent and egregious example of this deceit is the public declaration from the Russian High Command regarding the encirclement of 18 to 31 battalions of Ukrainian armed forces and the blocking of major urban centers like Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. This claim, made to suggest an imminent collapse of the Ukrainian defense, is an absolute military fantasy. It is entirely unconfirmed by any reliable source, including external military intelligence, independent open-source analysts, and, crucially, the pro-war Russian military bloggers themselves. This is a deliberate, high-stakes lie, a fabrication designed not for tactical deception on the battlefield, but for political consumption in the Kremlin. The core function of this deception is to manage the political risk of defeat. The Russian command is trapped. It is under immense pressure to show results after months of bloody, attritional offensives, and yet the army lacks the conventional military capacity to achieve a breakthrough. The choice is made to manufacture a reality on paper. By claiming the encirclement of thousands of troops, the Kremlin attempts to create a powerful political narrative that suggests Ukraine is on the verge of capitulation. This narrative is then used to justify the continuation of the war and the immense human cost being paid by Russian soldiers. This internal deceit has real and deadly consequences on the front line. The officers receiving these false reports are then ordered to carry out actions to close the circle or hold ground that in reality is still firmly under Ukrainian control. This forces Russian troops into suicidal, uncoordinated assaults, the very meat grinder tactics that have failed throughout the summer. These senseless attacks accelerate the loss of life and equipment, all to uphold a lie. This process confirms that the general staff is prioritizing political obedience over basic military competency and the lives of its own soldiers. The strategic failure of this deception is clear. The army is not making real progress, and the war is stuck in an irreversible tactical deadlock. This systemic reliance on propaganda over strategy is the clearest possible sign that the Russian High Command is paralyzed and incapable of mounting a successful, large-scale offensive. The remarkable and sustained stability of the Ukrainian front is not an accident of geography. It is a profound operational victory rooted in rapid technological and doctrinal adaptation by the Ukrainian armed forces. Having faced the Russian tactics of mechanized assault and then the insidious infiltration, the AFU has engineered a new, multi-echelon defense system specifically designed to neutralize the enemy's asymmetry. This wall of technology ensures that any success achieved by Russian special forces is momentary, costly, and ultimately reversed. The core problem the AFU solved was the porous front created by the chronic shortage of infantry. Since they lacked the manpower to establish a continuous defensive line, Russian forces began bypassing the sparse Ukrainian positions to sow chaos in the rear. The AFU's response was to reject the obsolete model of static defense and create a fluid, three-dimensional defense that converts technology and maneuverability into firepower. The defense begins with the technological shield that neutralizes Russian forward movement. Ukrainian forces maintain decisive drone superiority in the low-altitude airspace. This network of FPV kamikazes and reconnaissance drones establishes an omnipresent kill zone over the front, instantly identifying and destroying any concentration of Russian troops, motorcycles, or light armored vehicles. This technological superiority forces the Russian army to rely on small, stealthy groups, which are easier to hunt down and eliminate than a large formation. However, the key to stopping infiltration lies behind the forward line. The AFU has adapted its doctrine to create a dynamic, multi-echeloned barrier against these penetrating groups. This is where the reserve assault patrols come into play. These are small, highly mobile 3 to 4 man units that do not hold a fixed line.
Instead, they patrol the areas between the forward edge and the main support lines, using pre-prepared hidden shelters and dugouts. Their mission is not to engage in a decisive firefight, but to observe, report, and initiate contact with infiltrating Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups. When a Russian DRG attempts to infiltrate, the patrol opens fire to stop the advance and immediately calls in artillery and drone support. This mechanism is backed by the decisive use of quick reaction forces, which constitute the third echelon of defense. This is the renaissance of armor on the Ukrainian side. While Russian generals learn to fear and abandon armored columns, the AFU uses tanks and fighting vehicles like the Bradleys as crucial mobile anti-infantry assets. Against the easily equipped Russian DRGs, which often carry only light anti-tank weapons and lack the support of their own artillery, the Ukrainian armor provides overwhelming protected firepower. When a Russian group is confirmed to have infiltrated, the QRF, often including a single tank or a mobile fire support vehicle, is dispatched. The tank provides near-total protection against FPV drones and is devastatingly effective at eliminating easily equipped Russian infantry, reversing the penetration and clearing the breach. This is how Ukraine systematically neutralizes Russian tactical successes, converting the enemy's aggressive move into an immediate, irreversible loss of life and initiative.
The slow, grinding tempo of the war, the average advance of mere meters per day, is not just a sign of the Russian army's tactical failure. It is the physical mechanism that is accelerating a profound and fatal manpower crisis within the ranks. This internal decay is the single clearest indicator that the prospect of any future large-scale Russian offensive is militarily and logistically impossible. The core of this crisis is the wholesale destruction of troop morale and physical endurance due to the catastrophic failure to implement troop rotation. While military doctrine dictates that frontline personnel must be regularly rotated out of combat zones to recover, Russian soldiers are being forced to serve for continuous, unsupportable periods, often 165 days or more without relief. This is a deliberate, structural choice by the high command to compensate for the lack of political will to order a general mobilization. The system is sustained by subjecting its existing personnel to a relentless psychological and physical ordeal. This prolonged exposure to the intense violence of the front line has led to mass psychological exhaustion, severe degradation of combat effectiveness, and surging rates of desertion and refusal to follow orders. The soldier is physically and mentally broken, turning the army's existing strength into a structural liability. This lack of rotation is directly tied to the collapse of the overall military strategy. The high casualty rate and the forced retention of exhausted personnel mean that the contract and recruitment system is functioning merely as a replacement mechanism for the dead and wounded, rather than a force generator for new offensives. The Army is unable to build up the necessary operational reserves required to launch a new major strategic push. This is a self-defeating loop. The need to replace casualties consumes all new recruits, while the refusal to rest the existing troops ensures that even the survivors are functionally combat ineffective. The strategic consequence of this deep exhaustion is that the entire future military posture of the Russian Federation is being dictated by its demographic limits. The high command may continue to voice ambitions of breaking the front and capturing key cities, but the physical capability is gone. They cannot generate the hundreds of thousands of fresh, rested, and motivated troops required for a successful offensive. The vast human cost has created a situation where the Army must dedicate nearly all of its resources simply to holding the line. The war has shifted from a question of external military capability to an internal question of human sustainability, a factor which the Russian state is rapidly proving it cannot afford.
The comprehensive analysis of the Russian war effort leads to one unavoidable and terminal conclusion. Vladimir Putin's strategic plan has utterly failed, and the continuous tactical deadlock on the front lines is not a pause in the conflict, but the active mechanism accelerating Russia towards systemic defeat. The war has entered a phase where the enemy's resilience, powered by technological adaptation, has converted Russia's numerical strength into a fatal liability. The core realization of this conflict is that the current positional deadlock, the exchange of meters for massive human cost, is not a static condition. It is the beginning of Russia's structural collapse. The Russian High Command has no viable military option left. They have two choices, and both lead to ruin. They can attempt a new, costly offensive which guarantees the rapid consumption of their last armored reserves against Ukraine's technological defense, or they can maintain the status quo, which guarantees the slow, agonizing erosion of their manpower and economic base. Both paths end in strategic defeat. This strategic collapse is structurally driven by the simple fact that the war has fundamentally shifted its axis. It is no longer a battle of brute force and material stockpiles. It is a war defined by asymmetric attrition. The singular factor guaranteeing Ukraine's victory is the convergence of two fatal weaknesses within the Russian system: critical manpower exhaustion and accelerating economic insolvency. The manpower crisis is irreversible. The continuous futile offensives have consumed the professional core of the Russian army. The political leadership, terrified of the domestic consequences of a mass mobilization, is allowing its frontline troops to remain unrotated and exhausted. This refusal to rest and replenish its forces means that the army's combat effectiveness is in constant, sharp decline. When combined with the high cost of each offensive thrust, this creates a situation where Russia is losing personnel at a rate that is mathematically unsustainable, regardless of its total population size. This military exhaustion directly intersects with the financial collapse. The sanctions, the loss of European markets, and the internal mismanagement of the budget have created a fiscal environment where the state cannot afford to sustain the high costs of war. The massive spending required to replace equipment and maintain troops is accelerating inflation and driving the nation toward a systemic financial crisis. Every lost tank, every expensive drone, even the vast salary bill is a hemorrhage that the collapsing civilian economy can no longer support. In this phase, the strategic victory belongs to Ukraine simply because it has survived, adapted, and neutralized the enemy's main advantage. Ukraine's wall of technology, the mass deployment of FPV drones, the effective use of armored counterattack forces, and the new multi-echelon defense doctrine has forced the Russian military into a tactical trap. The result is an enemy who is structurally incapable of achieving its political goals and is compelled to fight a war of financial and human attrition that it is guaranteed to lose. The end of the war will come when the financial and human costs of fighting become so overwhelmingly catastrophic that the political decision to surrender becomes inevitable.